Hi, my name's Taylor Toby. I'm an OpenSciEd teacher and facilitator, and I'm here to discuss with you Lesson 13 of the 8.4 unit Earth and Space. I really find it interesting in this lesson how students approach systems thinking with something besides the Earth, Sun, Moon system, which they're very much used to. This pushes them to think a little bit differently about objects in space. So, how did we get here? We just finished the previous lesson set, and students figured out that fishing lures are made of specific colors that are visible at different depths, and that color is selected for the fishing lure so that it's visible to fish that live at that depth, and that the apparent position of a fish is different than where it actually is for a person viewing it on land. So we wrapped up that transfer assessment task and we went back to the driving question board and realized we still had questions about other objects in space. So let's look at lesson 13. It is an investigation lesson. It is 3 days long, takes about 15 minutes of prep. It is a hands-on investigation and you will need devices. So on the first day, we realize we have lots of questions about other objects in our solar system. And after some observations, we create an initial model for the Earth, Sun, Venus model, but we want some more information. Then, on day 2, after further investigating, students figure out that Venus and Mercury orbit between Earth and the Sun, while Mars and Jupiter orbit beyond Earth, away from the Sun. Then on the third day, we do some more investigating and find patterns to inner and outer planets. We figure out that moons orbit planets and that planets orbit the Sun, and that planets spin or rotate at different speeds. What did we figure out more in depth in this lesson? That even though Venus and other planets in the sky look like stars, they move differently and change their positions. We figure out that planets that are closer to the sun are rocky, small, and that the planets further away from the sun are large and gaseous. There are patterns to the orbits of planets, and smaller objects tend to orbit larger objects. And then we also figure out that most of the objects orbiting in the solar system are all on a similar plane. Students do not need to have facts about the planets in our solar system memorized. They just need to be able to notice them as they are looking through the infographic. So let's break down some key moments. In part 9, where you're using a model to explain the Venus-related patterns, really connect back to that previous systems thinking that you've been doing way back in the beginning with the Earth and the Sun and the Moon system, and helping think about observations from Earth and what is really happening from that other perspective of outer space. Also, if students are struggling, you can have them use manipulatives. You can use the same ones from the Earth, Sun, Moon to model what's going on. And you can just, instead of having the moon, have that represent Venus and see if students can recreate what's going on and then translate that 3D model into picking the best two-dimensional model. In part 13, where students are analyzing and interpreting data from infographics, you can see here a snapshot from the teacher's guide that shows the reading level for each section of the infographic. You can assign the most appropriate reading level task to each of your students. Not every title is needed. So you can use this also as a jigsaw and have groups come together to share information. If you have your students struggling to notice patterns as they're trying to figure out inner versus outer planets, you can have them narrow in on 2 objects specifically and have them compare, and then see if that pattern holds true for the other inner or outer planets. So where do we go from here? The patterns that we figured out led us to wonder how the objects stay on the same path as they orbit the sun or around a planet if it's a moon. And we want to know more about that. What is causing those orbiting patterns to exist? Some material management tips and tricks. So, for the infographic, you want to determine the best way to get that information to your students. I recommend digitally because with that black background, it's a lot of ink to print. But you do want to cut or edit the infographic if you're not using the whole thing in your class. That way, you can take out the pieces that you're not using. The black background does make it challenging for annotating. If you have one-to-one devices, students can annotate using like a white pen or writing over on, say, Notability or some other app like that. But you may want to consider formatting a notes page. So instead of annotating directly on the text, students kind of have like a note catcher to write down what they're noticing as they're reading. Word wall management. We will earn 2 words during this lesson: transit, meaning to pass across, and solar system, so the object or the sun and all the objects orbiting around that sun. Poster management. You will be going back to the driving question board for this lesson, and then during the lesson, you'll be creating a poster for the patterns as you're observing Venus. Thank you so much for joining me in Lesson 13. I hope your students find it interesting exploring the solar system, and I look forward to seeing you in Lesson 14.